Do you want bigger and better blooms for next year? If you're new to growing flowers, or if you have a flower garden in general, I'm going to be taking you through 8 tips that you could be doing this fall so that way next season you have bigger, brighter blooms that you could be showing off to all your neighbors. What's up? My name is Bree from Urban Gardening Canada and I garden in Ottawa's Zone 5. Today I'm going to be taking you through 8 tips on how to prep your flower garden for the winter so that next spring you have amazing blooms, and we're going to touch on different things like saving seeds and how to properly store any tubers that don't survive through the winter so that way next year you have amazing blooms. So the first thing that you could be doing in your October flower garden is to be saving seeds. I have tons of yarrow here. I don't actually need to save the seeds for my own garden, but I do love to save seeds so I can gift them to other people, especially because yarrow is a native here in Ontario. And so the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take a paper bag and label it with what seeds you're collecting and what year you've collected them in. And then you are just going to want to drop those seeds into the paper bag. And so I am just going to collect them, and yarrow spreads easily in the wind, so it is flying all over the place while I collect it. And you're just going to stick them in face down in here, and you can either keep the entire plant in here and clean it up over the winter time, or you can just give it a good shake inside and you will see that the seeds are starting to collect in there. If you are new to saving seeds, then cosmos are the easiest that you could possibly save from, because once the flower has dried, it turns into these clusters of seeds that come off of here. All you have to do is just kind of pinch the flower head and all of the seeds are going to come off. And one thing that you need to know about flower seeds is that they have chaff alongside the seed, and so you just have to know the difference between them. Echinacea is the most difficult to be able to tell the difference between, but usually you can just blow the chaff away and the seeds will remain in your hand. Tip number 2 is to deadhead any late blooming flowers. And so you can see here that my cosmos are still perfectly in bloom even in October. And so if you want to keep them going longer, you're just going to want to take off any of the dead blooms that their petals have fallen off. You do want to remember though that if you deadhead your flowers, you are going to stop any seed production. So if you are hoping to save seeds from a specific flower, you don't want to deadhead it, because those dead blooms are what is going to go to seed. But if you're just here for the pretty flowers late into the season, you do want to pop off or cut off any of those dead blooms to promote it to bloom further. If you do decide to deadhead your flowers, make sure not to deadhead all of them. This is echinacea or purple coneflower, and so if you leave the seed heads on this flower, it's actually a food source for birds during the winter. So make sure to at least leave some seed heads on your flowers to help provide food during those winter months. All right, so your next tip is if you grow any flowers specifically for drying indoors, you're going to want to cut those off so that way you can bring them inside to dry. I have a couple different ones here. I have straw flowers, and so you want to make sure you know exactly the right time to cut them in order for them to dry nicely, but we're going to cut these off. And I also grow status for dry flowers, and so you're just going to want to harvest these flowers so that way you can dry them for the winter. If you do decide to cut flowers to dry, first of all, you want to make sure that it's the right variety that's good for drying, where they dry out well and hold their color. And the other thing that you want to do is you're going to want to hang them in a place that gets really good airflow. So I'm going to hang mine. I'm going to tie mine upside down and hang them in the basement because, of course, I have central air that goes through the basement to help give some airflow. And within a few weeks, they should be dry. And I'm super excited to have a fresh bouquet of dried flowers that will last me all winter long. So if you grow anything like canna lilies or dahlias, you are going to need to take those in and store them over the winter. They are sensitive to frost here in most parts of Canada. Maybe on the Vancouver Island area, it's warm enough to keep them in the ground, but for the rest of Canada, it's not. I lost my pruners. And then I wondered, how often do we as gardeners wander around our property looking for tools that we left in random places? And like literally hours of my life. So I was just curious if you wanted to put in the comments below how often you lose tools. One time I watched as the snow melted on my front lawn and a pair of my kitchen scissors were laying on the grass. So that was an interesting experience to watch. Anyway, I'm gonna keep looking for these and hopefully I can get back to you with the next tip. And so what you want to do is you're going to cut your plants down at the base, and then you're going to dig up the tubers or the bulbs, and you are going to wash them off, allow them to dry for about a week, and then you can store them in your basement or a garage in some newspaper shreds or sawdust. And you're going to want to check on them maybe once a month during the winter just to make sure that they aren't molding or rotting. And if you find any mold or rot on your bulbs or tubers, you're going to want to remove those ones so that way they don't ruin the rest of your bulbs. If you want to overwinter any plants, some people like to overwinter their pepper plants, or if you are like me and you are growing echinacea, you might want to bring this inside because they are such slow growers that if you can overwinter this properly, then you can get a bigger plant for next year. I also grow echinacea for my bouquets that I like to make. And when you want to bring these inside, the best thing that you can do is remove all of the soil from the roots and wash the plant off, because mites are super common to bring inside with you. And if you get spider mites on any of your other house plants, then you are going to be dealing with a major battle all winter long. And so if you can take your plant out of the pot down to the bare roots, give it a nice good rinse off and repot it in fresh new soil, that is going to give it its best chance of living through the rest of the winter until you can put it back outside when spring warms up. I wanted to take some video footage of these adorable bumblebees that are all over my flowers and let you know that I have written a newsletter all about bumblebees, because it turns out that there are quite a few species here in North America that are actually endangered. And when I found out that information, I had to let my newsletter subscribers know about it. And so this is the type of information that you'll find on my newsletter. So if you aren't already on it, I highly recommend signing up, because you will learn all kinds of information from bumblebees and other garden insects to adorable birds that you see around your winter garden like black-capped chickadees. And I also talk about specific plants like sedums, because they are the perfect plant for your fall garden. And so I highly recommend subscribing to my newsletter, and I will have a link in the description below for you. And let's get back into today's content. Okay, so the next tip is to cover up any of your perennial flowers that are on the brink of a zone. So I am growing butterfly bush, and that is actually on the brink. It does better in zone 6 and warmer, but it can survive in zone 5 with some extra help. And so this you can just get at your local Canadian Tire or any other greenhouse, and it just gives some extra frost protection on it. And so the butterfly bush is actually, it struggles pretty hard here in Ottawa. And so to give it a little bit of extra care, I am going to mulch the base of the plant so that way the roots stay even warmer. And then you just put up one of these tents that pop over top of the plant, and that way you can keep it protected from frost and the harsh winter weather, so that way it comes back next year bigger, happier, with better blooms. Okay, the next tip is to prune your perennials, but this comes with a major asterisk. Not all perennials should be pruned in fall. Something like a lilac sets its blooms in the fall, so do not prune your lilac. But other plants, such as irises and peonies, can be pruned in the fall. So if your peonies are experiencing any type of powdery mildew or disease, you do want to cut them at the base and get rid of those leaves, because if you leave the leaves in that area or on the stem, it can overwinter and give your plant powdery mildew again next year. And same for irises. If they have any signs of disease, you do want to cut them back about 6 inches above the base. And then when it gets even colder, you can cut them right down to the ground, so that way they can overwinter and again get rid of all of those leaves, so that way you don't keep any disease to come back next year. The final task for the best blooms next year is to plant your spring flowers now. Do not forget that spring blooms from bulbs come from fall planting. And so I am going to be planting hyacinths because they are my absolute favorite bulb. I love the scent. Any type of scented flower to me is the best type of flower that can go in a garden. And so I'm going to be putting in hyacinths. However, you can also be planting daffodils, tulips, alliums, fritillaria. There's a wide list of things that can be planted now. And I really recommend you get on it, because when spring comes and you're going on your walks, when the weather turns and you see other people with daffodils, bright yellow daffodils, tulips, and all these other colors blooming, you will be jealous. And so make sure that you do plant your bulbs this fall. I do have one bonus tip, and that is if you have any flowers in pots, like I have this really sad rudbeckia, and you just don't have time to get it in the ground before the ground freezes, make sure that you put it in a protected area like a garage or a shed, or else the plant has to be hardy to 2 zones colder than where you are. So if I'm leaving anything in a pot here, it has to be hardy to zone 3, or else it's going to die in the pot. So just make sure that if you can't get to anything, getting it in the ground this fall, then to make sure that you put it somewhere protected for the remainder of the winter. And that is everything for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Taking you through some tips that you can be on this fall so that next spring, do you want, so your eye, why? Right in the eye. Why? Why? What's possibly stuck here? Who? How?